In the heart of a secluded African village, nestled between rolling hills and lush green forests, lived a woman named Zainab. She was known in the village as the Mad Woman, but her story was far from ordinary. Her condition had puzzled many for years, with villagers gossiping about her in hushed tones. Some believed that she had been cursed by an evil spirit, while others claimed she had lost her mind after suffering from a great personal tragedy. Zainab lived on the outskirts of the village, in a small hut made of clay and straw. Her life was one of isolation, marked by her strange behavior. She would often be seen wandering the village square, mumbling to herself, her eyes wild and unfocused. Her disheveled hair and torn clothing painted the picture of a woman consumed by something beyond her control. For months, Zainab had been carrying a pregnancy that no one could explain. She had never been married, nor had anyone seen her with a man. Her swollen belly seemed to have appeared out of nowhere, causing the villagers to whisper even more. How could a mad woman be pregnant, they wondered. Who was the father? Was she cursed? In the evenings, when the sun began to set, the village elders would gather in the central square, discussing the strange occurrences. Some believed that the spirits of the ancestors were angry, others thought that Zainab had been visited by a demon. No one truly understood, but all were certain that the pregnancy was an omen. As Zainab's belly grew, so did the rumors. One night, as the moon hung high in the sky, a group of curious villagers gathered near Zainab's hut. They watched her from the shadows as she paced back and forth, her hands resting gently on her swollen belly. Her face was a mask of deep thought, and she seemed to be speaking to someone invisible. The villagers stared, both fearful and fascinated. A young girl named Amina, who had grown up hearing the stories of Zainab, decided she would try to uncover the truth. Amina had always been drawn to Zainab, despite the fear that gripped the others. She was determined to learn what had truly happened to the woman who seemed lost in her own mind. She had heard her grandmother speak of ancient village tales, stories of spirits, and the power of the ancestors. Perhaps Zainab's madness was not what it seemed. The next morning, as the sun rose and the village began its daily routine, Amina set out to find Zainab. She walked past the small garden where the villagers grew cassava and yams, her heart pounding in her chest. She approached Zainab's hut and knocked gently on the door. To her surprise, Zainab opened the door, her wild eyes fixed on Amina. There was no anger, no hostility, just a quiet recognition in her gaze. It was as though Zainab had been waiting for someone to come. Amina hesitated, but she stepped inside. The air was thick with the smell of incense, and the room was dimly lit by the soft glow of an oil lamp. Zainab motioned for Amina to sit down on a woven mat, and without a word, she began to speak in a soft, raspy voice. The spirits told me that I would bear a child, but not in the way you think, Zainab whispered. I was chosen to carry the child of the ancestors, a gift, but also a burden. Amina was stunned. She had heard of the village's spiritual traditions, but never had she imagined such a thing. Zainab continued, her voice growing stronger. The child I carry is not from a man. It is the spirit of my lost son, a son who was taken from me too soon. He has returned to seek justice, to fulfill a purpose that only I can help him complete. Zainab's words hung in the air, heavy with mystery. Amina listened intently, her mind racing. This was no ordinary pregnancy, this was something far deeper. Zainab spoke of an ancient curse that had been placed on her family, one that had caused her to lose her son years ago. It was said that the ancestors, angered by a betrayal, had taken her child as punishment. But now, they were offering her a chance for redemption, through this pregnancy. As Amina sat there, absorbing Zainab's words, she began to realize that the truth about Zainab's condition was far more complex than anyone could have imagined. The woman the villagers had branded as mad was not mad at all. She was a mother carrying the weight of a sacred responsibility. The pregnancy, the madness, it was all part of a greater plan that no one could yet fully understand. The morning passed in silence as Zainab shared more of her story, speaking of her connection to the spirits, the gods, and the curse that had followed her family for generations. Amina felt a deep sense of respect for the woman who had suffered so much, and yet, remained strong. Zainab's madness, it seemed, was merely a manifestation of her struggle to fulfill a mission that had been placed upon her by forces beyond her control. But there was one thing that Zainab had not yet revealed, something that would shake Amina to her core. As the day wore on, Zainab told Amina that the time had come for her to prepare for the child's birth. It was not just any birth, it was a rebirth, a new beginning for the village, for Zainab, and for the child who was destined to change everything. Amina could not help but wonder, what would happen when the child was born? Would it bring peace to the village, or would it unleash something far more dangerous? And most importantly, what was the truth behind the spirit's involvement in all of this? As the sun began to set once more, casting a golden hue over the village, Amina realized that she had stumbled upon a secret that would change the course of her life forever. She was now part of a story much larger than herself, a story of ancient traditions, lost children, and the power of the ancestors. But even as she left Zainab's hut, the question still lingered in her mind, was Zainab truly mad, or was she the keeper of a truth that no one was ready to accept? The next morning, Amina couldn't shake the weight of Zainab's words from her mind. She had walked away from the hut with more questions than answers, her mind swirling with confusion and intrigue. What had Zainab meant by the child of the ancestors? How was this pregnancy connected to a lost son, and why had Zainab been chosen for such a profound task? As Amina made her way home, she passed the village square where children played and the elders gathered to discuss matters of the community. Everything seemed normal, but for Amina, nothing was. The reality of what she had learned began to settle in her mind, and she knew she couldn't keep this knowledge to herself. But who would believe her? Who would believe a story so far beyond the realm of what anyone had ever experienced? Zainab was a mad woman in the eyes of the village, and anything she said would be dismissed as another delusion. But Amina felt differently. She had always felt a strange connection to Zainab, a pull that made her feel like she understood her pain in a way others could not. That night, she sat alone under the stars, contemplating everything she had learned. She thought back to the stories her grandmother had told her as a child, tales of ancestors, spirits, and powerful forces that controlled the fate of those who walked the earth. Her grandmother often spoke of a legend that had been passed down through generations, a tale of a woman cursed by the gods for her betrayal, a woman who would lose her child and be forced to live in madness until the child returned to fulfill a sacred purpose. Amina had always dismissed these stories as myths, as fantasy, but now, they felt all too real. It was not just Zainab who had been affected by this curse. The entire village was unknowingly tied to it. The spirits of the ancestors, it seemed, had not forgotten. They had watched, waited, and chosen Zainab to bear this child. But the question remained, why? What was the child's purpose, and what role did Amina play in all of this? As the days passed, Amina found herself returning to Zainab's hut more frequently. Each visit revealed more pieces of the puzzle. Zainab, though often lost in her thoughts, was slowly beginning to share more about her past, the story of her son, who had died years ago under mysterious circumstances. He was a beautiful boy, full of life and joy, a child who had been the light of Zainab's world. But one fateful day, he had fallen ill. Despite the village's best efforts, the child had passed away, leaving Zainab heartbroken and broken in spirit. Zainab spoke of how she had wandered aimlessly after her son's death, refusing to accept that he was gone. It was during this time that the spirits had come to her, telling her that her son would return, but in a way that no one could predict. They warned her that the curse would not be broken until she accepted her role in the grand scheme of things. Zainab had struggled with the spirit's message, refusing to believe that she could be the one chosen to carry the weight of such a heavy task. But the pregnancy had come, unexplainable and undeniable. And with it, the change had begun. Zainab's madness, it seemed, was only a manifestation of the confusion and overwhelming burden of this mission. She had been given a second chance to make things right, to redeem herself, but only if she carried the child to term. Amina listened intently, her heart aching for Zainab. She understood now that Zainab's madness was not a punishment, but rather a consequence of a greater calling. The spirits had not cursed her, they had chosen her. But Amina still didn't understand the full purpose of the child. Why now? Why Zainab? And most importantly, what would happen when the child was born? One evening, as Amina sat with Zainab, a strange feeling washed over her. The air felt thick, charged with an energy that she couldn't explain. Zainab, who had been calm and serene for most of the day, suddenly stood up, her eyes widening with an intensity Amina had never seen before. She whispered, almost as if speaking to herself, "It is time. The child will come soon, and the truth will be revealed." Amina, startled by the sudden shift in Zainab's demeanor, stood up to leave, but Zainab stopped her. "The truth you seek is in the child," she said, her voice soft but filled with a deep, knowing wisdom. "The child will change everything. And you, Amina, are part of this story. You must help me prepare." Amina was overwhelmed. She had never imagined that she would be involved in something so monumental, so life-altering. But she couldn't ignore the pull she felt toward Zainab. She had seen the truth in her eyes, heard it in her words. Zainab was not mad. She was a vessel for something greater than anyone in the village could comprehend. As the days turned into weeks, the tension in the village grew. Word spread that Zainab's pregnancy was nearing its end. The villagers began to take notice of the strange occurrences surrounding her, the way the animals in the village seemed to behave differently, the way the air felt thicker, as if charged with anticipation. Even the weather had changed, with storms appearing out of nowhere, only to dissipate just as quickly. One night, as Amina stood by the village's central fire, watching the flames flicker and dance in the cool breeze, she overheard the elders talking. They were afraid. They spoke of the child as if it were an omen, a harbinger of something terrible. They spoke of rituals and sacrifices, of the need to appease the spirits before the child was born. The fear was palpable, and Amina realized that the villagers, though outwardly calm, were terrified of what Zainab's pregnancy might bring. It was then that Amina understood. The village, too, was part of the curse. The child, born of Zainab's madness, was not just a savior, he was the key to breaking the cycle of fear and mistrust that had plagued the village for generations. But the villagers would have to learn to accept the child for who he truly was, not for the fear that they had allowed to fester within their hearts. Amina knew what she had to do. She would help Zainab bring the child into the world, but she would also help the village face the truth about their fears and misconceptions. It was time for the village to heal, and that healing would begin with the birth of a child who would change everything. The days leading up to the birth of the child were filled with a palpable sense of anticipation, not just for Zainab and Amina, but for the entire village. As the full moon drew near, the air seemed to thrum with energy, as though the very earth itself was preparing for the momentous event. Amina, having committed herself to supporting Zainab, was more determined than ever to uncover the truth behind this mysterious pregnancy. Zainab had grown quieter as her due date approached. The wild, frantic energy that had once marked her every move was now replaced with a calm, almost serene demeanor. She spent her days sitting by the window of her hut, her hands resting gently on her swollen belly, as if waiting for the child to speak to her, or perhaps for her spirit to connect with the spirit of her lost son. Amina, always by her side, could feel the gravity of the situation in her own heart. On the night of the full moon, Zainab's labor began. There was no fanfare, no grand announcement, it was a quiet, almost sacred event. Amina had spent the entire day preparing the small hut, gathering the necessary herbs and tools for the birth, just as Zainab had instructed. Zainab's calmness was now nearly otherworldly, and Amina couldn't help but feel that there was something almost divine about this moment. As the hours passed and Zainab's labor pains intensified, Amina held her hand, offering comfort and support. Zainab didn't cry out, didn't scream in pain as most women did. Instead, she whispered softly to herself, as though speaking to the spirits that had guided her through the madness of the past months. The air around them felt thick, charged with anticipation. It was as if time itself had slowed down, the world holding its breath in waiting. The moment finally arrived. With one final push, Zainab brought the child into the world, her body trembling with the effort. Amina's eyes widened as the baby was laid in her arms, a perfect, healthy child, his skin a rich, dark shade, his eyes wide open and alert. But there was something about him that was different, something that Amina couldn't quite place. Zainab, exhausted but filled with a strange satisfaction, looked down at the child. She smiled softly, tears of joy filling her eyes. "He has come," she whispered, her voice filled with reverence. "The child of the ancestors. The one who will change everything." Amina stared at the baby, her heart racing. There was something powerful about this child, something that sent a shiver down her spine. She couldn't explain it, but she knew that the moment he entered the world, everything had shifted. This child was not just the result of Zainab's madness, he was the key to something much greater. The air around them seemed to hum with energy, as if the child himself were a conduit for something ancient and divine. But the true revelation came a few moments later. As the baby settled into Zainab's arms, a low rumble of thunder echoed in the distance. The village, usually peaceful and quiet at this hour, seemed to stir in response. The winds began to pick up, swirling around Zainab's hut, and the light of the moon outside flickered as though it were alive. Amina felt an overwhelming sense of awe and fear. She realized that this was not just a birth, it was a rebirth, a return of something lost to the world, something that had been waiting for this exact moment. Zainab, sensing Amina's unease, placed a hand on her shoulder. "The child is not just mine," she said, her voice filled with a quiet strength. "He is the son of the spirits, the son of the ancestors. His birth will reveal the truth of our village's past." Amina was overwhelmed by the weight of Zainab's words. It was as though the child had come not only to fulfill Zainab's destiny but to bring balance to the entire village. Amina couldn't help but wonder, what truths would this child reveal? What secrets had been hidden for so long? As the days passed, the child grew stronger. His eyes, wide and curious, seemed to hold knowledge beyond his years. He would often stare at the elders with an intensity that made them uneasy, as though he were seeing through them, into the depths of their souls. The villagers began to speak in hushed tones about the child, calling him the child of the ancestors, in reverence. They no longer whispered about Zainab's madness, for it had become clear that she had been chosen for something far greater than anyone had imagined. But not all were pleased with the child's arrival. The elders, who had once feared Zainab's pregnancy, now found themselves struggling with the implications of this new reality. They could feel the change in the air, the way the village itself seemed to shift, as if the very land beneath their feet was stirring with ancient power. The child's presence was both a blessing and a threat. If the legends were true, then this child had the power to unearth long-buried truths, to reveal secrets that could change the future of the entire village. One evening, as Zainab sat outside with her child, cradling him gently in her arms, she felt a strange sensation, a presence, as though someone was watching her. She looked up, and to her surprise, she saw the village elders approaching her hut. They were solemn, their faces unreadable. The air was thick with tension as they came to a stop before her. "Zainab," the elder spoke, his voice grave, "we have come to seek the truth. The child you bear, he is no ordinary child, is he?" Zainab smiled softly. Her journey was far from over, but Zuri now knew that she was stronger than she had ever realized. And with every step she took, she was not only healing herself but helping others do the same. The power of community and healing together. The months passed, and Zuri's life began to settle into a rhythm. She was excelling in her studies, building strong relationships with her peers, and even starting to feel at home in the bustling city that had once seemed so foreign to her. But there were days when the weight of her mother's sacrifice, the loneliness of being far away from home, and the pressure of her medical studies became too much to bear. One afternoon, as Zuri was walking through the university campus, she saw a familiar face, a fellow student from her village, Kofi. They hadn't spoken much since they'd both arrived at school, each lost in their own struggles, but the sight of him brought an unexpected comfort. He waved at her from a distance, his face lighting up with recognition. "Zuri," Kofi called out, jogging toward her. "It's been a while. How are you doing?" Zuri smiled, grateful for the familiar face. "I'm doing all right, Kofi. Just busy with exams and everything." Kofi nodded, his expression softening. "I understand. You know, I've been thinking a lot about how far we've come since we left the village. It's easy to forget where we started, but we can't forget the people who helped us get here, right?" Zuri's heart warmed at his words. She had been so consumed by her own journey that she hadn't stopped to think about the people who had supported her along the way, especially her mother. "I've been thinking about that too," Zuri admitted, her voice soft. "Sometimes, I feel like I'm carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. My mom sacrificed everything to send me here. I don't want to disappoint her." Kofi smiled gently, his eyes filled with understanding. "You know, Zuri, I think your mom would be proud of you no matter what. You're already doing so much, look at all the lives you're going to change as a doctor. But don't forget that you're not alone in this. We're all in this together. We're from the same place, and we have the same dreams." Zuri's eyes filled with tears as she realized just how true his words were. She had spent so much time focused on her own struggles that she had forgotten the power of community, of coming together with those who shared her dreams and her challenges. It wasn't just about her mother's sacrifice, it was about the strength of the village, of the people who had always been there, supporting her, even from a distance. Zainab continued, her voice growing more intense. "Imara's greed led to the suffering of many, including my own bloodline. The ancestors cursed her, and in turn, cursed us all. The curse passed from one generation to the next, causing death, madness, and misfortune to those who came after her. It is said that the curse would only be broken when a child born of the bloodline, pure and untainted, could reclaim the lost honor of our ancestors and restore balance." Amina's mind raced as she processed the information. "But Zainab," she asked, her voice filled with concern, "how does the child fit into all of this? How is he connected to the curse?" Zainab's eyes darkened as she spoke the truth that had been hidden for so long. "This child," she said, her voice heavy with emotion, "is the reincarnation of my great-grandmother's lost son. He was taken by the spirits, but he has returned to fulfill the prophecy. The curse can only be broken when he is born, when the bloodline is purified, and when the village faces the truth of its past. The child carries the strength of the ancestors, and through him, the balance will be restored." Amina sat in silence, her mind reeling. The weight of Zainab's words sank deep into her heart. The child was not just a symbol of hope for Zainab, he was the key to unlocking a long-forgotten truth, a truth that had been buried beneath layers of fear and secrecy for generations. And yet, there was one final piece to the puzzle, one final truth that needed to be revealed. The elders, who had once feared the child, had begun to seek guidance from Zainab. They realized that they could no longer ignore the reality of what was happening. They knew that they had to confront the past, to face the curse that had haunted their village for so long. One by one, the elders came to Zainab's hut, bowing their heads in reverence as they asked for her guidance. It was clear now that the child was not just a symbol of spiritual power, he was the one who would lead them to redemption. But the child was not yet ready to reveal the full extent of his power. He was still young, still an infant, but Zainab knew that his time was coming. The village had to prepare itself for the final unveiling of the truth that had been hidden for so long. It was the night of the next full moon when Zainab finally gathered the elders. She had spent the entire day preparing for this moment, gathering the necessary offerings, and performing the rituals that would allow the village to commune with the spirits. The time had come for the village to face the full extent of the curse, and for the child to reveal his true power. As the elders gathered in a circle around Zainab's hut, the child, now a few months old, was placed in the center. The moonlight bathed the child's small form in an ethereal glow, and the village seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. Zainab stood beside him, her voice chanting a prayer that had not been spoken for generations. The winds picked up, swirling around the hut, and the air grew thick with energy. The spirits had arrived. The child's eyes, once calm and peaceful, began to glow. A low hum filled the air, as if the very earth itself was vibrating with the presence of the ancestors. The villagers watched in awe and fear, unable to comprehend the magnitude of what was happening. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the village, a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was the voice of the ancestors. "The time has come," the voice said. "The truth will be revealed." The ground beneath the villagers' feet trembled, and the skies above darkened, as if the heavens themselves were bearing witness to this ancient moment. The child's eyes glowed brighter, and then, in an instant, everything went silent. For a long moment, the village was still. But then, as the silence stretched on, the child's eyes returned to normal, and the glow faded. The wind calmed, and the sky cleared. The village had experienced something powerful, something that could not be explained by mere words. Zainab, standing with the child in her arms, looked around at the elders. "The curse is broken," she said quietly. "The truth is out. Now, we can rebuild. But the child will always be here, watching, guiding us." The villagers, though shaken by the experience, felt a strange peace settle over them. The weight of centuries of fear and guilt had been lifted, and in its place was a newfound sense of hope. The morning after the ritual, the village felt different. It was as if the air itself had been cleared, as if the oppressive weight that had hung over the land for generations had finally lifted. The sky, which had been dark and foreboding the night before, was now bathed in soft sunlight, casting a warm, golden glow over the village. The sound of birds chirping filled the air, and for the first time in years, the villagers could breathe easily. The child, who had played such an essential role in breaking the curse, was now seen with reverence by the entire village. His birth had not only marked the end of a long-standing curse but also signified the beginning of a new era. He was no longer the child of the ancestors, alone. He had become a symbol of hope, a beacon for the future. The villagers, who had once feared him and his mysterious origins, now understood that he was a gift to bring balance and healing. Zainab, too, had changed. She was no longer the mad woman who had wandered the village in confusion. She was now a respected elder, revered for her wisdom and strength. Her journey had been a long and painful one, but she had come through it, not only for herself but for her entire village. Zainab had borne the burden of the curse and the madness, and in the end, she had delivered her people from the darkness. Amina, who had been by Zainab's side through the entire ordeal, now stood as a bridge between the village's past and its future. She had witnessed Zainab's transformation and the incredible power of the child, and now, she was part of the village's healing. The once fearful and divided community had begun to come together, united by the realization that the truth, no matter how unsettling, had brought them closer to the heart of their history. As the days passed, the village began the long process of rebuilding. The elders, once hesitant to embrace the child, now sought his guidance in matters of the village's future. They turned to Zainab for wisdom, knowing that her deep connection to the spiritual world was what had brought them to this moment of peace. The village, once plagued by distrust and fear, had found a new sense of unity, and they were ready to embrace the future. But even as they moved forward, there were still those who whispered. Some villagers, though relieved by the breaking of the curse, still harbored doubts. They questioned whether this peace could last, whether the child, though a symbol of hope, could truly be the answer to their troubles. Some even feared that the child's power was too great, that it could eventually lead to another betrayal, another downfall. Zainab, however, remained calm in the face of these fears. She knew that healing would take time, that trust could not be built overnight. But she also knew that the child was not just a symbol of spiritual power, he was a part of the village's future. The child's legacy, and Zainab's, would be shaped by the actions of the villagers, by their willingness to face the truth and rebuild their community. One day, as the village gathered for a communal meal, Zainab stood before the crowd, holding the child in her arms. The villagers fell silent as she spoke, her voice carrying the weight of generations. "The curse is gone," Zainab began, her voice steady and strong. "But the work does not end here. This child, born of our blood and the spirits of our ancestors, has shown us the way. He is the bridge between the past and the future, and it is up to us to honor his gift. It is not enough to simply break the curse. We must work together, as a community, to rebuild what was lost." Amina, standing beside Zainab, could feel the power of her words. The villagers, once so divided, now listened with open hearts and minds. Zainab had led them to this point, and it was clear that her guidance would continue to be essential in the years to come. The village had faced its darkest hour, and now, it was ready to step into the light. Zainab continued, her voice filled with hope. "We must not forget the lessons of the past. The spirits of our ancestors have shown us the way, but it is we who must walk it. We must protect our land, honor the traditions that have sustained us for generations, and ensure that this curse is never repeated. The child will guide us, but it is our actions that will determine our future." As Zainab spoke, the child, who had been silently observing, began to stir in her arms. His eyes, still wide with curiosity, locked onto the villagers, and for a moment, it felt as if he was looking directly into their souls. The village, still holding its breath, watched as the child's gaze shifted from one villager to the next. It was a look of understanding, of connection, a look that seemed to say, "I see you. We are one." The villagers, moved by the child's gaze, felt a sense of unity they had never experienced before. The fear that had once divided them began to fade, replaced by a deep, unspoken bond. They had all been part of the same story, the same curse, the same redemption. And now, they were part of a new story, one of healing, growth, and hope. Days turned into weeks, and the village began to flourish once more. The fields were tilled, the houses repaired, and the once barren land now blossomed with crops. The village, once crippled by fear and guilt, was now a vibrant, thriving community. Zainab, though no longer the outcast, continued to serve as the spiritual leader of the village, guiding them with her wisdom. The child, still small but growing quickly, became the center of the village's hopes and dreams. His power, though not yet fully understood, was a symbol of the village's rebirth. But there was still work to be done. Zainab knew that the village's healing was not complete, and she was determined to guide her people every step of the way. As she stood at the edge of the village, looking out over the land, she knew that the journey ahead would be long and difficult. But for the first time in years, she felt hope. The curse was gone, and the village had been given a second chance. It was up to them to honor that chance. Years passed, and the once distraught village was now thriving. The land, once barren and forgotten, was rich with crops. The villagers had rebuilt not only their homes but also their hearts. Zainab's name was spoken with reverence, no longer a symbol of madness but one of resilience, wisdom, and spiritual strength. Her son, the child of the ancestors, had grown into a young boy, his presence now a guiding force within the community. He was a reminder of their history, their shared struggles, and their potential for change. The boy was not an ordinary child. From a young age, he showed an extraordinary wisdom beyond his years. The elders, who once feared his power, now came to him for counsel. Though he was still just a child, his clarity and understanding of the world were beyond anything they had ever witnessed. The village had never before seen such potential in one so young, and they realized that this child was not merely a symbol of redemption, he was the key to their future. Zainab, though aging, continued to be a spiritual leader for the village. She had found peace in her role, having carried the burden of the curse and watched it be lifted through the birth of her son. Together with the boy, Zainab taught the villagers how to live in harmony with the land, how to honor their ancestors, and how to recognize that true power comes not from fear but from unity and understanding. As the years went on, the village began to expand. People from neighboring areas came to witness the transformation, curious about the story of the mad woman who had given birth to a child of such power. They had heard whispers of the curse, the truth, and the redemption, and many sought the wisdom that had helped the village heal. One day, a group of travelers arrived, their faces weary from their journey. They had heard the stories and wanted to know more. The villagers, ever willing to share their lessons, gathered to welcome them, eager to spread the knowledge they had gained. The travelers, once skeptics, left the village transformed, carrying with them the message of the child of the ancestors, the child who had broken the curse and brought the village to a new dawn. As the child grew into a young man, he took his place among the elders. His understanding of the spiritual world, combined with the wisdom Zainab had imparted to him, made him a leader who could guide the village into the future. The boy who had once been the center of mystery had now become a beacon of hope, not only for the village but for all who sought the truth. Zainab, now older and more fragile, knew that her time was coming to an end. She had seen the village through its darkest hours, and she had brought them into the light. Her legacy, however, would not end with her. It would live on through her son, the child of the ancestors, whose power and wisdom would continue to shape the future. One evening, as Zainab sat by the fire with the boy, now a young man, she spoke of the future. "The curse is gone," she said, her voice soft but filled with purpose. "But it is up to you, my son, to ensure that the lessons we've learned are never forgotten. The past can never be undone, but we can shape the future. You must teach the villagers and those who come to us that true strength lies in unity, in understanding, and in accepting the truth." The young man nodded, his eyes full of determination. "I will continue the work, mother," he said, his voice steady. "I will guide our people, and I will ensure that the legacy of our ancestors lives on in a way that brings healing, not destruction." Zainab smiled, knowing that her work was complete. She had given everything to her village, and now it was in capable hands. As she closed her eyes that night, she knew that the cycle of fear and madness had truly ended. The curse had been lifted, the truth had been revealed, and the village had been reborn. In the years that followed, the village flourished. The boy, now a wise and respected elder, led his people with compassion, guiding them through challenges and helping them grow. The village became a place of peace and prosperity, where the lessons of the past were honored and the future was shaped with hope. The child of the ancestors, once a symbol of fear, had become a symbol of hope, of transformation, and of unity. The village had learned that the path to healing lies in facing the truth, no matter how painful it may be. They had learned that embracing their history, with all its mistakes and hardships, was the key to finding peace and moving forward. Moral of the story. The moral of the story is that healing comes from confronting the truth and accepting the lessons of the past. The villagers lived under the shadow of a curse for generations, but it was only through facing the truth, no matter how painful, that they were able to break the cycle of fear and suffering. Zainab's journey, and the birth of her son, taught them that true strength lies not in avoiding the truth but in embracing it, no matter how difficult. By acknowledging their history and learning from it, they were able to rebuild and thrive. The lesson is clear: it is only by understanding and accepting the past that we can build a brighter, more unified future. Fear, ignorance, and denial may hold us back, but the truth will always find a way to set us free. Through unity, understanding, and the courage to face what lies ahead, we can overcome any challenge and create a legacy of hope for future generations. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to us. Press the subscribe button to subscribe. Thanks for watching.